I would like to start the introduction. I know we'll have some people still trickle in. But the most important thing is to first, of course, welcome you to the Ecology of Fear with Anna Dyson. And I would like to actually start, that is our Abend family sponsored lecture, a very special one. Stephen Abend is the 1965 graduate of the Weitzman School with a Master of Architecture degree and is a practicing architect based in Kansas City. His daughter Linda Abend, freshman, is also a 2007 graduate of the University of Pennsylvania College of Arts and Sciences. Stephen, his wife Barbara, and daughter Linda established the Abend Family Endowed Lecture Fund in 2020, it's very recent, to provide an annual lecture on an architect or landscape architect to students, faculty, alumni, and friends of the school. The Abend family is with us virtually tonight, and we're very grateful for that continued support. And then we have the Arlene Gamza Fellowship that is also celebrated tonight. Tonight we're also celebrating the establishment of the Arlene S. Gamza Fellowship. The Arlene Gamza Fellowship in Architecture Fund was established also very recently in 2021 from Arlene's estate to provide financial assistance to a graduate level student with a goal of promoting gender diversity in study and practice of architecture with a focus on urban issues and design. So first, my task is really to congratulate our student Regina Gonano for being the inaugural recipient of the fellowship. Regina, stand. It's always good to celebrate important things. So in 1956, Arlene Gamza began the then 5-year program at the University of Pennsylvania that prepared her to become a licensed architect. Ms. Gamza graduated in 1961. She was the first woman to receive an architecture degree, or she was the only woman to receive an architecture degree that year. So imagine, girls, one woman graduated in the whole year. We kind of got rid of that problem, right? So inspired by Professor Kahn, Louis Kahn, that is, she focused her career on urban architecture initially at Emery Roth & Sons in the design department before beginning a lengthy tenure at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. For 10 years and until retirement in 1996, Ms. Gamza was the chief architect for the city of New York. In her own words, I've devoted my entire career, 30 years of it, in public service to creating well-designed, affordable, and livable homes in New York City. And we all know how important that is, and not only in New York City. This is one of the big issues, I think, in the US we all need to help tackle. The Arlene Gamza Endowed Fellowship carries on her legacy by providing financial assistance with the goal of promoting gender diversity, as I just mentioned. And we are super happy that Regina was the recipient. So I will move on to the Ecology of Fear. I kind of love the title, so I mentioned it twice. Yeah, the person I'm welcoming tonight is a very, very dear friend, both of Weitzman, I think of many people here personally, and we know her very, very well. And Anna is also co-invited by our MSD and EBD with Bill Braham as director. So Bill and I co-organized this, and we're super happy to have you here, Anna. It's a huge honor and pleasure. Anna studied at l'Université Laval in Canada and has an MArch from Yale. We at Weitzman know Anna for many years. We know her from her start of teaching at RPI, where she started a spectacular and probably one of the first real research centers in architecture that I remember. That was really the cross-pollination between architecture, technology, and environment. It was called CASE, the Center of Architecture, Science and Ecology, which she co-founded with SOM. So it was also really interesting. It was a collaboration between an architecture firm and the academics, where she really deployed multiple systems within scaled building test sites, like, for example, the AMPS system, which was installed in the Public Safety Answering Center in the Bronx. That was also included in the Best Architecture of 2017 by the Wall Street Journal, and was the first full-scale test of the production of fresh air from within a building through plant-based air handling systems. It was also, for me, one of the first people that moved away from architecture design represented in drawings and models into full-scale prototypes. Something we are all still working towards, but I think is a really important transition in architecture to understand how we are going to innovate architecture. And I think Anna was definitely one of the really important pioneers in that. Currently, she is, however, moved from RPI, and she is the Hines Professor of Architecture at the Yale School of Architecture and Environment, and the founding director of the Yale Center for Ecosystems in Architecture, a research initiative that integrates interdisciplinary labs across campus to collaborate on the research, development, and deployment of new architectural systems that are focused on the challenge of metabolizing energy, water, and materials within architecture in radical ways. At the Yale School of Architecture, Dyson has established a new model for PhD-level design research in architectural sciences, which has received multiple honors already for pedagogy, including the award for the most innovative academic program from the Association for Computer-Aided Design in Architecture, ACADIA, which we are hosting in October 26 to 29. I hope you join us. And she got an award in excellence from the United States for the Green Building Council. She has been directing design research programs that have competitively won awards and contracts from multiple sponsors, such as the National Science Foundation, the US Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the EPA, we all know that, the United Nations Environmental Programme, the New City Department of Design and Construction, and from private sponsors such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Baruch Foundation, and the San Francisco Foundation. I'm stopping here, but there are many, many others. She is also the recipient of the Innovator Award from Architectural Record and holds many international patents on building system innovations from the collection and distribution of clean water, energy, air quality, and material life cycle. Her work has been exhibited internationally and at venues including the Museum of Modern Art, the World Future Energy Summit, the Center of Architecture, to name a few. Designs for Novel Systems have many awards, including the first prize from the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, for climate camouflage and integrated concentrating solar facade systems, the Architect R&D Awards for solar enclosure for water reuse, and the active modular phytoremediation systems. And in 2019, Yale CEA Ecological Living Module demonstrating a nexus for on-site energy, water, and agricultural production was named as the first world-changing idea. I really hope that I win that one day. That was just struck me that that's an amazing thing to win. So it's the first world-changing idea, and that was awarded by UN News. So with that, I really like to welcome again Anna Dyson for the lecture of Ecology of Fear. Thank you, Anna.
Well, that was quite an introduction. I have to say that I'm so honored to be here. I've been such a huge fan of the school in general for decades and of so many of the faculty that you have here, and it's such a special place. Part of my mandate was really to introduce our new program, Yale CEA, or the Center for Ecosystems and Architecture. We just changed the name to And Architecture, so but not in time for press. Yeah, it's one of these things when you have a startup. We haven't formally launched, but we would love for the folks at UPenn to know about us, because we consider that you are absolutely kindred spirits in so many different ways. So what are we trying to do here? As I think Vinka, it was an incredible introduction, and thank you so much. It's very comprehensive. I think in a nutshell, maybe we can just say that we're linking research areas that are ecosystemic with building projects. And so there's a relationship, if you will, between scales where we're leveraging building projects in order to and Vinka used the term radical, and I do think it's an important term, because I think that what happens within the budgetary and time constraints of practice and even of studios is very, very hard to radically change something on an ecosystemic level. And we can change certain aspects, we can plug in certain components and parts, but to actually effectuate ecosystemic changes is extremely difficult. But we still need the buildings because, and this is why we're developing, or we're continuing what we did at CASE, per Vinka's introduction, to form an academic industrial alliance in order to have multi-scalar and ecosystemic testing across a lot of different labs simultaneously with the data acquisition and the lived experience in actual building systems. And so a lot of times, and these are actually pictures from our old center, CASE on Wall Street, which was at Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. What can we do with building and testing our systems? Well, we have the so-called DNA. We say DNA of the built environment, and we don't even mean it as a metaphor. We're serious about the fact that we need to start looking at even our mechanical and our electrical systems through the lens of living systems behaviors. And so we have all these artifacts that and I'm going to talk about that towards the second half of the lecture, about what we're really doing with materials and how do we move materials through our system. But ultimately, if we want to effectuate change in the built environment, we have everything that we see around us, and this will all be here. More than 80% of the built environment that we see around us will be here in 2050, is predicted. So we are not starting from scratch. There's no such thing as a tabula rasa in architecture. What it really means is we are transitioning and we're creating what we often like to call Frankenstein prototypes, biomechanical hybrids and other things, which we'll see a lot of. But first, the topic of the lecture, Ecology of Fear. I apologize to all of the domain scientists out there and everyone else for bastardizing this term, but I'm in good company because Mike Davis first did it. Mike Davis first did it with his beautiful, so go and read that book if you haven't, it's an amazing book. I'm actually thinking about this term a little bit differently, even than its classical term in science, but really classically it's looking at the psychology of animals and species in the context of predatory conditions. So how do we react in the face of predatory conditions? And it's just a kind of a provocation that I've thought so much about when we think about built ecologies, or when we're building in the environment, so much of our identity, so much of our sense of security is wrapped up in the choices that we make. And what do we build buildings for? Many things, but so important is that sense of security. And what happens if, when we are actually in the face of a sense of fear, the fear is pervasive, the fear is not necessarily related to an identifiable predator, but it's actually related to the ecosystems that we are actually creating as a society. And that a lot of our ecosystems are so-called environmental control systems, and control is the operative term there, are a quest to control. right? But what happens when the very systems that we are designing in order to control our environment are actually turning, in a sense, back on us, and we don't have to wait for artificial intelligence or any of these things to happen, although they will certainly present even ever greater threats. But already, let's think about this. Are we in control? Is any one entity, even in the most autocratic situations, are we in control of the ecosystemic artifacts that we are creating? Or are they, in a sense, entrenched from all different aspects? Here, I'm going to show this as a provocation just to show that we are always working with sites. As you all know, in architecture and in ecology, we always have to think about the absolutely specific condition of sites. And we also are working generically as well, in terms of thinking about prototypical conditions and conditions that become transferable across sites that are very different. But in the context of Cape Town, we can see that a city of 4 million came very, very close to zero water, literally. We're talking about, over the course of a 3-year period, the dependency on surface water conditions went from the upper left all the way across to the lower right. It's a massive change. Imagine that within 3 years, we have an ecosystem that will transform that quickly, that 4 million people are completely dependent on for sustenance. And so it clearly, you know, Cape Town is typical of a contemporary city where some of the residents, I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but many of the residents do have access to water that's piped into their residence, but we can see on the left-hand side that there's a great variety of access to infrastructure. So on the upper left, we would see a lot of access to infrastructure. On the lower left, we would see informal settlements that typify global cities worldwide, where you have a tremendous amount of rural to urban migration and inadequate infrastructure for sustenance. And yet, in the run-up to almost 0 days, so it was narrowly averted. They ended up getting some water in and replenishment of the water table at a certain point, but we're talking only a few days. I'm not sure exactly how many days, but it was very, very close to having zero. They started a lot of social so we can also think about the impact on the social and what will happen. Literally, this website has been taken down, but these are screen captures from a website where they're tracking water usage, and they're basically letting, there's a dot where, and you can see where domiciles and everything will basically be outed on the website as to how much, if they are in compliance or not in compliance with the water usage. That is a frightening thought, that degree of surveillance is coming, but if you think about all of our utilities and everything that we do, more and more with the tracking, we have access to all of this data. And the issue really is if we start to become dependent on municipal infrastructure that cannot deliver water for anyone, what is our what is the sort of transition when we start to think about, will our municipalities be ready to face a 0-day water again? It just happened. How soon, again, will we have 0-day water? So one of the things that, when we're working with ecosystems and ecologies, the politics are very, very difficult, but all of our artifacts have politics, and we know that as architects. It does, when we're working on the idea of looking at a completely new relationship between on-site ecologies or local ecologies and then the delivery of systems, we're not in any way saying that the state or a municipality does not have the responsibility to deliver systems to all of the residents. We're very much in favor of social organizations and means of social organization towards the delivery of services such as water, energy, and other resources that are required. And yet, what we will say, which is a common theme amongst amongst all of our work is we are searching in our work always to look at a completely new type of relationship between local and regional and even global ecologies and global relationships and the acquisition and delivery then of sustenance, basically, water, energy, and materials. So in this particular area of inquiry, and I should have mentioned on the website, those videos at the beginning were from our website. We tend to publish our work in a lot of different venues, but we have a lot of the work in design publications, as Vinka mentioned, and we, are sometimes popping up in awards, but a lot of our publications are in the scientific realm. So if you're interested, I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail in a lot of the systems, but please go to our website if you're interested in, reading more about what it is. But basically, in the context of Cape Town and all of our different sites, we are working, as Vinka mentioned in the introduction, with the United Nations Environment Program. One of the things that we're working with them on is developing what we call the Ecological Living Module Program, which is basically in relationship to the tens of millions of refugees that are global right now, that they have between 60 and 100 million at any one time of people that they have to find housing for urgently, and then what happens is usually the residency time, the mid-residency time is 18 years. So you can see that, imagine living in a refugee camp for 18 years without any running water, without any energy, without any really access to very good food. A lot of times the conditions are dangerous in terms of leaving the camp to get any of these things. So one of the things that, that they asked us to do is really look at what can we do absolutely on site. So on site, what you're seeing there, for example, in this row, these are the plants where we're working with a chemist to look at the photosensitization of this is just an example of an ecological living module, which I'll see and show you in a minute, which is actually more geared towards New York City. But in this case, we can see farm walls that are used for both, this is backwards, that are used for both, all of the plant-based processes that we're working with are used for the purification of water, the purification of air, the delivery of food, in some cases the delivery of disinfectants like hydrogen peroxide or other things, and the delivery, of course, of medicines. So if you can see on the bottom, a lot of these very common plants, in some cases, plants like St. John's wort, for example, are ancient medicines. In Italy and Germany, a lot of places, they've been using them for centuries, millennia, actually, for certain conditions. But what we're doing here is, if you see like a sort of a fragment, let's say, of an ecological living module, what we're always looking at is completely reimagining the interface between interior and exterior, no matter what climate we're in, even in an extreme climate. I'll invite everybody to think about where their oxygen is coming from right now. Fun fact that we don't think about a lot, but please do think about it for a moment. That's a trick question I'll ask at the end. We can talk about that. But basically, the whole idea that that we can test systems and we can test materials for, in the case of Cape Town, what we need to do, and what you're seeing on the upper right is converting aquaculture waste from shellfish and other types of waste products in order to put into hydrogel-based systems to absorb water from the air. So because in Cape Town is a good example of many, many climates worldwide, even in Mumbai, where we have big monsoons for 9 months out of the air, the year that moisture is hanging in the air and is not coming down, and we need to be able to get that moisture and deliver for potable and domestic water, as an example. And so we've worked with very large projects, as Vinka said, like the Mumbai airport with Skidmore and Jumeirah, to think about, how might we look at the longer term. But basically, as you can see, is everything's on a clock. Everything is behaving, in a sense, with diurnal cycles and the relationship of energy flows of solar, wind, moisture, et cetera. And so how do we take, for example, these plants, like on the right-hand side, those are the sources for the hydrogels that are tested, that are alongside that roofscape and absorbing it. The plantings in this particular case are going also into either roof or membrane or facade membranes in order to basically work with solar in order to purify. And so this is, we also do some really like down and dirty prototypes that are not necessarily always that beautiful, but this is a good example on the right-hand side where we were demonstrating this in Nairobi. This is the purification of water just from the plant and the solar without any additional energy. And it's also, this is one that's using pumps and, solar panels, but more recently, and we will be publishing actually this fall, a new system that doesn't use any external energy at all for the purification of water. And a greatly sort of, one of the things, obviously, if we're working in this context, we have to work towards extremely low cost systems. So, tubes and other things like you see here will probably be too expensive. But this is an earlier prototype that we showed and demonstrated also on the roof of the ELM a few years back. A lot of times it's hard to show what can happen with an ecosystem, and as I said, we've got a lot of Frankenstein hybrids. This ELM in New York City, for example, is just using scrap, a CLT, and other things that we had with Alan Organsky, Gray Organsky, and looking at how we can just make a very, very simple module that really can provide energy, water, clean air, clean water, actually purify the water, and enough food for a family of 4. And in this case, literally, we're talking about 195 square feet or 20 square meters. That's what the size, unfortunately, that is given to us by the UN. But we show them what, and this is like on the plaza in New York City as a kind of demonstration. We're not saying this is a solution by any means for anywhere except that one moment of demonstration at the UN. So I just want to be very, very clear that it's really, really important that we're not saying in any way that you can transpose from one condition to another, and that will be really extreme with bioclimatic design. If we really are talking about net zero, if we're really talking about sustenance, then there's an interfacial exchange across the building envelope that is absolutely geared to that one condition. But of course, we take a lot of data. We take a lot of data from human beings. How are they doing in this space? Where is all the material coming from? What is the life cycle? What is the impact on forests? Fortunately, at Yale, we have an incredible School of Forestry that is now the School of the Environment. They changed the name too recently. A lot of people are doing it these days. But they're really looking at that interrelationship between, if we were going to go replace that concrete, steel, all of these things with bio, what happens when we scale up worldwide? There's a lot to think about there. But also, I just want to say, we are testing always incumbent systems with emerging systems. So that you can see on the roof is a new system that you can read about it, and I'll talk about a little bit in the when we're looking at materials, but I encourage you, if you're interested in solar, we have multiple systems in solar, but this system is currently testing, and we just demonstrated in renewable energy at over 75% combined heat and power. But the important thing about it is, actually just going back to this, if you see up top, it's also modulating daylight, it's taking heat out of the thing, so it's passive and active. When we're thinking ecosystemically, we're not ever thinking about something that's passive. I'm going to talk about this slide later on, so I'm just going to skip really quickly to that. But if we're thinking about that context in South Africa and thinking about scaling up in a similar type of ecology, and here this is Botswana, is also quite water scarce where we were working, and there was no grid. This is where we leverage our relationship with AEC partners, in this case in shop architects, to really look at how can we, as much as we can, once again, in that sort of, once the train leaves the station, we've got to deliver a building, and in this case, almost a district, but how can we really change the relationship to natural ecosystems? Here we had incredible partners with the clients, because they literally did not want to tear down any trees. So you can see that their relationship to this landscape was profound, and then we learned a lot about it. Here's just a rendering of, we were working really at the schematic design phase. We were lucky to just talk to the architects and be able to interface with them on the concept of an energy and water blanket, where the savanna would basically be pulled across, and there would be pools of bioretention throughout. These clerestory windows are also containing that solar facade system that I just showed as a concept. So you can see in a very early section where there was this idea of this relationship between the energy and water nexus and what we could do, with even intensifying. So you would have more water within these courtyards, and preservation of water and the growing of certain species because of being able to collect it or concentrate water. Actually, you can see those in these clerestory windows there, where we were visualizing that solar facade. And unfortunately, that's under construction right now, and we're not scaled up with this technology enough to put it in these clerestories just yet. But what I learned so well from Skidmore, Owings and Merrill is working with the engineers, especially Bill Baker and others there, that taught us that, the architect probably wants to get every idea into one building. And the idea was, if it's research, we will leverage one building, and maybe it'll be 3 buildings later that we're able to get it in. And so that's, I think, a really, really important thing. And so I'm just showing those because architects are, increasingly wanting to read a lot of the scientific journals, and just food for thought that at the way and the format in which we have to show a lot of that work is difficult for us. And I think there's a lot we need to think about format and presentation and being able to, in fact, in a good way, each other's disciplines a bit, and be able to have maybe more of our visuals and maybe more of their metrics or whatever in the way that we represent things. But I think, like so many centers, we are working globally, and we work with AEC partners that work globally, and we can see this massive transformation of regional biomes. And I think closer to home, we were down on Wall Street for over a decade, as Vinka mentioned, and we thought a lot about thinking about our own center, or our city, and the buildings as sort of living laboratories where we could really start to leverage, especially public works projects or these huge projects, in order to think about the idea of radically new built ecologies. And it's baby steps with it. But I think what's really striking to me about this image, which I think is just amazing, is obviously this is from Manhattan. On the left-hand side is a sort of visualization of what Manhattan might have looked at. One of the things that we really want to stress in our work is not to think about the moment that we're in as dystopian. I mean, maybe from the standpoint of a lot of species on the right-hand side, and human beings, as we'll mention in a minute, is that is technically a brownfield site. It's very, very hard to live there for a lot of species. But if we look at the surface area, and if we look at all of the different opportunities for different niche conditions or other formations, we could potentially have net positive biodiversity in the city with this particular, I would call it a carcass in a way. It's like a pre-living carcass. We have humans and their parasites mostly here, and then we have these kind of radically sort of cut definitions between where we designate that other living species and other systems can coexist, very neatly defined. But what happens when we start to actually design through the lens of other living systems? And then also, what happens when we start to look at our own ecologies as not, once again, this is called the, global light pollution map on NASA's website. And of course that can be, this is a beautiful live, this is still from a live. But what if we think about that actually as a map of potential nighttime photosynthesis? We can look at our things in very, very different ways. We can look at our artifacts in different ways, and we don't have to necessarily think about, once again, this sort of either-or condition. Either we are in sort of ecosystems and non-human living systems, as we've called them before, but what happens if we don't use those dichotomies anymore and don't actually even use the term non-human? We can see that that's a term that's using constantly in our sort of anthropocentric view of things, but if we start to actually think about a continuum of the ecologies, on the left-hand side, of course, we have, massive degree of carbon mopping and sequestration with natural systems during the day, but we've also created a kind of diurnal condition where we have a tremendous amount of internal light and other things. So if we look at that sort of, multi-scalar, if we look at design on a multi-scalar level as well, on the left-hand side, this is the project in the Bronx that Vinka mentioned. And starting to think about partnering, once again, with designers at each scale. So we have designers of microbial ecologies in biotech, technology. We have designers, of course, of other mechanical and electrical systems, et cetera. But if we start to think about that co-design, not just with other living systems, but also across the disciplines, there is a way to think about our ecosystems in a very, very different way. This is, I actually pulled this out because on the left-hand side is a section from a system that we developed with Skidmore, Owings and Merrill many years ago, actually. This is when I was at CASE and RPI. And we were, it's been evolving in terms of its morphology over the years, very, very slightly every time through so many different criteria, through airflow criteria, through microbial criteria, through soil design. But at the same time that we're evolving morphologies at that smaller scale, we're also inhabiting buildings that could be considered as sort of the epitome of a kind of mechanical and electrical paradigm. So going back to this theme of ecology of fear, this building here, this Public Safety Answering Center too, was the building that New York City built during the Bloomberg administration to basically be the redundant building in case we have a bioterror attack or a Fukushima or a 9/11. As many of you might know, the command center for New York City was in the base of the buildings when they got hit. And so I love this, this title from Fast Company, the safest building in the world. And you can imagine why they call it the safest building. It's blast proof. You can shut off the fresh air intake in case of a bioterror or a thing. It's got numerous safety features. It is basically, out of that 880 million, initially actually the budget was 1.2 billion with a B, and then during the last recession, I guess we're entering a new one, but the one in 2008, it went all the way down to 400 and something million. And we were shocked that our little piece of that was still in the budget. Why was our green wall still in the budget when the police and firemen did not have any lockers at one point? Now they do, thank goodness. I went back up to 180. But basically, we had a discussion very early on with the police and firemen. And we talked about air quality. And the architects did not want us to talk about anything nasty. They didn't want us to be negative in any way, quote unquote. But really, we slipped in one slide with toxins, which I'm embarrassed to say that I don't have. I should have that in this lecture, about where are our toxins coming from. But I think we know now, 10 years later, post-pandemic, we know everything that's being emitted here. We know that we're exchanging microbiome, everyone here, over the course of an hour, so I'll try to keep my lecture to an hour. We obviously have a tremendous amount of source emissions coming from the outside. We're mixing. Our air inside is only as good as our air outside, of course, as we know. But really what we were interested in here is, wow, they have to shut off the fresh air intake in case of a compromised event on the outside. What does that mean? How long do you think we can last on the inside of a building like this if we shut off the fresh air intake? It's related to my earlier question about where our oxygen is coming from. Any guesses? Throw it out. We won't know who you are, because
2 weeks.
It's good. You would think we would be able to, right? Yeah, a few days. Yeah, so the safest building in the world. Yeah, and think about it. Yeah, okay, exactly. So, so the safest building in the world, it turns out that this roofs of safety. Honestly, this is the most extreme building of what our paradigm is, of to separate, to, have so-called, let's say, tight construction, or all of these things that we are told are sustainable. To isolate. Isolate is a synonym of insulate. All of the things that we are doing in terms of the way that we transfer energy across the building envelope, or the way that we connect to the outside, is really, in a sense, antithetical to the idea of our own health and well-being, and certainly in many ways the health and well-being of ecosystems. So why would we choose, to actually piggyback on this building, is exactly because of that isolation. So we are choosing, in a way, to just experiment. What happens, when you can see in the background, this is only from one seed, a plant, and what we're testing, because we were able to create a safe zone within a zone, because of their programmatic requirement, just what would happen when you would create, what are we doing when we're creating built ecologies, and what is that interrelationship between animals, i.e. human beings and our parasites, in this case, although we hope there will be many more in the future, and living systems. So this is by no means, once again, a solution. I will not say we are all about connecting with the extended ecology, but as an experiment, it was very, very powerful for us, and goes on. These are many of the scientists from Lamont Columbia Earth Observatory, and we're working with City College, Weill Cornell, NYU, many universities, to analyze exactly what we're doing in this, what is that interrelationship between safe zones and the ecology. Now, back to how we were in the building. The firemen and the policemen that we talked about with the toxins that they had suffered in 9/11, they were absolutely adamant that the green wall had to stay in the building, and they kept defending us on programmatic requirements. And then when it was just impossible when we went all the way down to 400-something million, it was the art budget that saved us. They said it could be an art piece. So we love that, because ultimately we hope that future systems will absolutely not be designated as functional engineering, art, architecture, and that all of these dichotomies, all of these categories will absolutely be completely irrelevant to the future of systems. But I throw these in as relics of some of the things of how we thought the wall should look. Back there, you saw something where the architects had a lot of influence over how the wall would be produced and how it would look. We were very, very interested. We had been, obviously there are all these relationships, as I said, between lab and the data acquisition. And there were a lot of prototypes that were built where we were testing on ourselves within rooms and within, this is at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill again, on Wall Street, where we have PhD students and master's students taking a tremendous amount of data and developing, and then we had a lot of different types of designs. But at the end of the day, what was so important, and where our colleagues from NASA, all of the work that we're doing really in this area does come from space and from really studying what happens when you take a piece of Earth, i.e. ourselves, to Mars or to Moon or whatever, and you actually have to keep people alive. Turns out we don't know how to do it without plants for a long period of time. We could do it for a short period of time, but it will have a built-in expiration date at some point. So if we're thinking in perpetuity. So a lot of this research does come from NASA and from the biohome and other things where they thought, after the 60s, they would be colonizing very quickly a lot of these, outposts, but it turns out it's taking a lot longer. Science takes a long time. But one of the really important things where I think there's a nice carryover from with architecture and art culture was that at the same time as Erwin Hauer and others were studying minimal surfaces for artistic purposes, earlier than that shown, and some of our collaborators in the department in mathematics and in biology at NASA were looking at the emergence of those relationships from biological forms. And one of the reasons why that was so important to us at the time is, in order to get the results that we need, that sort of mass balance between CO2 and oxygen in human occupied spaces and other things, and we needed, and also to inoculate the microbiome with a healthy microbiome, sort of external forest-type microbiome, we needed a lot of plant mass, and we needed to minimize structure. So there were a lot of crossovers between the relationships between how could we retrofit conditions or spaces with different double-sided walls where we would be packing a lot of biomass. And what we're really doing here, and you can read more about it on our website, is we're actually using the root rhizosphere, or the growing media within the roots and the microbes, to also reform VOC's molecules and other chemistry, and what we are going to be publishing in the next quarter is an inoculation of the microbiome. Now, why is that important to actually reshape our interior microbiome? Well, it's only been a few hundred years since we've really been largely living most of our lives indoors. Now, in a place like Philadelphia or New York City, we would live more than 95% probably on average indoors. It's a tremendous amount of time, and we're dramatically changing our immunity and health. There's incredible data coming out from the so-called biodiversity hypothesis that the human health and immunity is actually related to the presence of rare flowering plants. That means you're not safe if you're in the suburbs, you're not safe if you're even on farms, but we're talking about the destruction of really, really critical types of ecologies where the rare is critical to immunity. And this is really emerging science. But in this case, we're testing all the way across, all the way down to the bottom, and sort of testing whether or not we can actually bring the level of living forest type air and living water into a built environment through the processing. Now, in New York, of course, we don't have that much, we don't have a lot of ecosystem scale sites to test on, so we have to take it where we can, and but virtually, obviously in our relationship with firms like SOM, et cetera, they have massive district scale. We had a whole city actually that we were visualizing with Bureau Happold and others, aerospace city in Abu Dhabi. But it really, this is looking at how could we, this is in the Middle East, if you really had to completely change an ecology so that you had interior, exterior environments and you were self-sustaining for all of the, as we said, energy, water, food, and others, other aspects, how could you do that at a district scale where you have peer-to-peer sharing and you have a lot more opportunity for ecosystems relationships and possible sort of sustenance from not actually drawing from non-renewable resources. So if we're thinking about complete circular material economy or the development of ecosystems, this is in the same, I'm just showing this as a more near-term project where this is Sheikh Khalifa Medical City, where patients really can't go outdoors at most of the year. So being able to take off all of that heat and glare at the top with these solar canopies that are then doing that purification of water and purification of air and delivery of energy is really, really critical to not just this is, let's say, the sustenance of that medical city, but also that patients can be outside at a time when, for example, the local temperature might be 110 degrees. I mean, we were working on this with SOM, actually we started this project over 10 years ago, and recently on hold, but that's how a lot of architecture goes. But in this case, we can think about how rapidly our climate is changing and how much we are actually going to need to provide outdoor spaces that are viable. So I'm just going to end with a sort of sequence that is looking at really our material culture and how we actually deliver materials in the environment. Of course, this is just a snapshot on the top of the Ames, Charles and Ray Ames, Powers of 10, one of my favorite artifacts actually of architecture, which happens to be a film. Definitely Google it if you haven't seen it. Most of you have probably seen it. Even if you've seen it, Google it again and watch it. It's an incredible treatise, and what I think is so interesting about the difference between when they were making this in the mid-20th century, where there was this incredible euphoria that we could actually, for the first time, through the manipulation of light and optics, visualize at all these different scales, and there's many, many more scales, right, on either end of this that in the actual video, but I'm just showing a few that might pertain to what we think of as the architectural scale. If we're all the way at the right-hand side in the city, and then all the way on the left-hand side in DNA, literally how are we transposing the DNA? Everything that we do across this is actually shifting morphology. So we're shifting our DNA literally right now by sitting in this room. Fun thought. Or think about if we sit in this room many, many years and decades and et cetera. What does that mean? What kinds of conditions are we creating across the spectrum? Well, as we said, we're making our systems not from the basis of biological conditions, but really from the basis of extractive material economies, where the way in which we make things is really in a direct linear trajectory from the first fire-burning cultures, right? We're extracting from the earth, we're forming, and the way in which we form our systems is really, in a way, using more and more energy, more and more concentrated energy, more and more burning, the further we go down in scale. So we might think about all of these emerging sustainable materials, right, nano technologies and other things, as being smart, intelligent, bioresponsive. Yes, they are all that, but they are massively energy intensive in terms of their making. This is we're still only at the macro scale, still visualizing into microelectronics and optics. But when we go down in scale, once again, what are we doing to make those optics that you just saw? We're doing exactly what we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. We are basically scratching, sculpting, we might be forming, in this case it is a compression mold, but to make that compression mold, we're scratching at metal, basically. We might have very, very sophisticated methods to manipulate those materials in those forms, but ultimately we are shaping materials into different forms for different processes, right? And if we think about the semi-metals, the semiconductors, we literally have to go to 1100 degrees C and back within a few seconds to make these technologies, right? So they're extremely energy intensive. So to think about are we using more and more energy? Yes, of course we are in our things. But when we start to get down to this really small scale, to the subatomic, or when we start to think about the molecular scale, we are now actually flipping in a paradigm to a certain extent. We have the potential to grow or to cultivate. And so one of the things, so these are all snapshots at each scale of that solar facade that I thought I had a video of in this, and I didn't, but I showed you some stills of that in Botswana and in the ELM. But if we think about the fact, once again, that we are in this extractive material economy at every scale, that we can start to think about these things ecosystemically. These do behave in a way ecosystemically along biological paradigms, because this, even though this is mechanical and electrical and has all of these things, the way that it's metabolizing energy through the system is, in a sense, ecosystemic in spirit, but it is not ecosystemic in material. And I think that that's what I just want to transition a little bit to this whole issue of how do we truly get towards circular material economies, where we're not just cutting down trees to make things or growing, what are processes that are extra or pre-human, let's say, like any of our timber products or agricultural products. Obviously, we can think of agriculture as a biotechnology, but how do we literally start to think about the issue of growing across those scales simultaneously so that we actually can start to truly participate in a kind of biocompatible and circular material economy. Early days, but I just, in this case, actually how are we for time? I just want to make sure that it's okay. Okay, great. So, yeah. That advanced materials frontispiece that you saw, by the way, is really looking at, once again, if we go down to that subatomic level, what that was showing is the crinkling of graphene, so that we can change the optical properties of our facades. And what that means is that we can disassociate what something looks like and how it's behaving energetically. It was a very important concept for what we need to do in architecture, probably, if we're going to be harnessing these things. And also looking at having multiple handles on the energy flows so that we can actually potentially collect energy, purify water, do many things in terms of that transfer. So thinking about, as an example, what if this facade was completely transparent, but it's stopping solar heat gain, for example? So we can disassociate those relationships along the lines of also integrating the idea of, and I throw this up, actually, the last one was for Andrew, but this one is obviously for Bill. And Bill can tell you a lot more about energy than I can, that's for sure. He's a real scholar and a tremendous scholar in this area. So I don't want to embarrass myself, except to say that that this issue of having concentrated energy, as we might have, for example, if you look at top, you look at a tree, for example, and the leaves and the branches and all of the different aspects before you get to a trunk. Ultimately, our design systems also have to go back and forth between very diffuse energy flows that are coming into us. If you think about sun hitting a building, right? We're talking about a very, very diffuse energy source, but then the energy that's flowing through my microphone or my computer has to be extremely concentrated in the form of electricity, and it has to be accessible and storable and movable, transportable, right? So we've got a lot of things that we have to do that are actually resembling also the way that living systems do behave. And yet at the same time, sorry, this is so washed out, that's a visualization in our lab of projecting DNA across. And yet at the same time, if we're looking at the ecosystems that we have, we're clearly not talking about going back and living in a tree. So we do have to form, and we do have to amplify, and we do have to concentrate. But the question is, at what scale do we do that, and in what way do we do that? Do we do it with the flow of energy that is more localized? And if we're going to do that, in what way would we develop our systems? And what we would say is a lot of what I just showed you with the icy solar facade system and all of those different mechanical and electrical functions really need to be, in a sense, embedded within the materials themselves. So that, as I said, if we have a piece of clear plastic, how many things can that clear plastic do, right, if we're starting to embed the plumbing, the mechanical, the electrical, and other things within, once again, at the subatomic. So one of the things that as we are parallel tracking with the different materials that we're working with, as architects probably, and you know, maybe even just any type of scholar probably wants to look at and visualize what they're doing in a way that might be inhabitable, let's say. And so we're creating simultaneously also virtual environments where we can start to travel down scales, and we can start to travel across domains and disciplines and to other and be able to simulate other ecosystems in our lab. So we're in the process of developing, this is still visualizing from my last appointment these are visualizations from the MPAC at RPI. But what you just saw there, actually, and some stills, is getting a bunch of multidisciplinary folks together. This happens to be for smart geometry, but we got a lot of different engineers, biomedical, cognitive scientists, and other materials and facade engineers and buildings professionals, obviously architects, into the room to play virtually with our systems, our material systems that now at the moment are only at like small scale. I mean, we have prototypes, actually I don't have the prototypes here, but I think they're on our website, We have some prototypes that are getting bigger and bigger, sort of the scale of maybe a window pane, a small window pane. But a lot of the works that we're doing in the lab with the chemists and with the material scientists are really, really small. So how can we visualize what the potential is? One of the reasons why we think it's really important, not just to see what we can do, but also if we have so-called bioresponsive systems that can respond to a lot of different criteria, what will emerge? What we found out about working, when this is a still, and we blew the pixels up huge. So in many cases, these pixels can, in this case, is electroactive polymers that can be very small, like a kind of movable frit, or it can be completely imperceptible. But what we found out is if many people put their criteria in, let's say 10 different people, we saw these biomorphic patterns emerging. And I think that this is a huge social question for emerging ecologies. If we have emerging ecologies that are bioresponsive, who gets to decide what things look like or how they are, creating space and perception and emotions, or culture, obviously iconography, information exchange, God forbid, advertising. Any of these things could be harnessed by these kinds of technologies. And so the question is, what does something become and why, and who gets to decide when things are so obviously responsive? And we don't have two people in the room here that would choose the same pattern or choose the same preference, let's say, whether it be visual, lighting, thermal, et cetera. So that was a really interesting thing to see that when many different, let's say, overriding criteria, let's say we have our overriding criteria of environmental conditions, urban conditions, building envelope, pragmatic and visual, and then the desires and demands of people, which we probably should have up top, they can be completely non-technical, right? That all of a sudden these unidentifiable patterns start to emerge with this. Another really thing, and these are really old panels on the right-hand side. This is sort of from work that is several years back, but you can see how all of a sudden, if we have real-time feedback, we can understand the implications of our decisions. And that we've, developed that a lot further with ELM and other things, but really understanding how much energy, what is the U value, R value, et cetera, solar heat gain coefficient, et cetera, of these systems when we choose certain things. And I think that what's really important is we're experimenting with these dynamic conditions, not for necessarily the sake of it. There's not necessarily a technophilic aspect of it. It is really driven a lot, in our case, by the environmental criteria. But of course, there is a huge aspect that is cultural and really important. But if we just look at the environmental for a moment, think about today in Philly. Maybe it wasn't too cold today, but think about Philly in 2 months. In the morning, it's going to be cold, right? You're going to need a little bit of passive. By the afternoon, you're probably going to be in cooling mode, and maybe even within 1 hour in a building like this, with all the activities, you'll switch from heating degree to cooling degree. Then at a certain point, you might want a dynamic interface at night. Certainly, you're going to try and preserve heat loss, at night in November or December, and so the degree of exchange, if we were really going to be in tune with bioclimatic energy flows and with that difference between what's interior and exterior, we would have a lot of different criteria for what we need to do at every moment. And then we're not even talking about all of the different preferences or criteria that we might have that are social. So, of course, there's economic, ecological, socio-cognitive, and the rest. So this is a short list, actually. It looks like a big list of different criteria for what a facade or what a building envelope needs to do, but it's really a very short list. And I just throw this up to show that with a dynamic facade that would, let's say, be a frit, a stationary frit is only optimizable for like 1 moment out of the year, but now we can see in the second row, all 3 patterns are having the same solar heat gain coefficient. So it's not true at all that this fear, I should have said there's ecology of fear, which I'm going to still talk about towards the end what we mean by this. But then there's also fear of ecology. There's tremendous fear that I could say the DNA of that goes back to my own school when Paul Rudolph basically said that the School of Architecture was in the arts campus. They were not scientists, and they didn't have anything to do with the environmental design that the mid-moderns like Neutra, Korb, Kahn, Wright, and everyone were obsessed with. Rudolph did a wonderful job. He was a genius at pastiche and at sculpture, so he took everything from Wright and Korb and everything in terms of the formalities. But the truth is, many of those formal conditions were driven by bioclimatic considerations in the 40s and 50s with those protagonists. But what I wanted to say is basically that in our profession, we have seen a massive schism between so-called building science, pursuits or the sort of technical aspects of, and maybe ecological considerations, and social, theoretical, and aesthetic concerns within architecture. And that is deep. It goes back decades. I believe a lot of that fear came in the 60s from this concern about scientific determinism, or an idea that somehow there would be a right and a wrong way, or a certain form that would be solar or optimized. We all know that we can never talk about the word optimization in architecture. There's no such thing as optimization, and that I just threw up that slide of those 3 different patterns just as an example to show it could be infinite how many patterns might have that exact same solar heat gain coefficient. So let's not think about worrying about optimization for one thing or another. The feedback on environmental performance and design is absolutely our friend. It gives us power. It gives us a lot of criteria for why we might actually do something that links us back to the rest of society. There's no worry that the sort of ego architect or artist architect will be compromised. I think that this is absolutely a dichotomy from the 20th century, this idea that the individual and the collective cannot actually come together in a project that is both highly creative and we have the contributions of individuals in that are artistic and that are in a sense unique, and also have bioclimatic performance. So I think that that's something that we have to think about as a profession. We all have to really, really push towards smashing those inherited concerns and fears. So I'm turning my lecture title to Fear of Ecology on that moment to say that. Now, why is it so important? Actually, this is a good example of what we're in Nairobi now, and I'll end with this project, which is that this is considered by itself, I think, and the United Nations Environment Program that is located right here as one of the greenest cities on Earth. I think they say the greenest city. It has a tremendous amount of biomass in comparison to most cities of its size, as you can see. So what happens when we start to develop this city the way that we have? Are we going to saddle them with the dumb 20th century infrastructure that has left Cape Town bereft, the centralized huge water system that it cannot deliver or cannot acquire water or deliver it? Or are we going to think about a completely different way to construct with the ecologies that are there and indigenous to this condition? There's a tremendous amount of old growth forest all through East Africa that is amazing, but there's also a lot of agriculture. Certainly, we work also, with those super high-tech materials like the thermoelectrics at Nano and the other stuff that I showed, but we're also looking at the fact that we have to deliver architecture through bulk materials. In this case, this was an experiment with Oak Ridge National Lab, Branch Technologies, and Shop Architects, using what can be characterized as a kind of detritus from bamboo. So, but any type of biomaterial can be used to print with. That large arch is actually printed carbon fiber. But if you think about the idea that we might be able to print through solar means on the side of, let's say, farms or forests, a tremendous amount, for example, of the forest fires worldwide are caused by, or are fueled by forest detritus that we might be able to cull and really change the profile of forest fires worldwide. Half of Africa, sometimes it seems like, is burning at some point, with all of that fuel that could potentially be repurposed towards something else. If we think about post-agricultural waste, we have 5 billion tons in the Global South alone that is produced annually that gets dumped or burnt. And so when it gets burnt, obviously we're talking about a massive amount of greenhouse gases that go up into the air, and we're also talking about terrible air quality for those that live there. And so we're looking, how can we potentially completely change that paradigm of not just the extractive material paradigm of heat, beat, treat, and discard of non-renewables, but how can we also look at changing that paradigm of having to be straitjacketed by a factory, let's say, for prefab, or where time and space and money is, or labor, et cetera, are very, and energy are all costs to the system. And how can we change that and transform that into something that is working with all of the growing processes that we already do? So agriculture is massive. It is very detrimental to energy consumption and water consumption worldwide in its current form. But if we start to think about complexifying and harnessing a lot of these processes for multiple different outcomes, we can potentially supply a tremendous amount of building materials with bulk materials to replace concrete and steel. So here you're looking at, also in the background is the arch that could be printed out of post-waste. Right now we're looking at fibers, the carbon fiber, because as a stand-in for certain things to understand how how the process would work. But on the lower, you're looking at a very, very inexpensive process that could potentially, is pressing of coconut waste, soy binder, and mycelia at very low heat. In a way that can be very, very strong. And now in this case, our colleague from University of Nairobi is sitting down on that bench where we're embedding within the bamboo, the printed bamboo, thermoelectrics. So it's basically taking from the sun into a kind of switchable either heat or cool, so that if you sit down on that, you can decide instantaneously, do I need the heat or do I need the cool? So these are all sort of, ongoing at larger scale, obviously, of embedding some of those smaller scale materials like the thermoelectrics into these bulk material systems. And how can we do that, in such a way that we're literally transferring sun that's coming in right at that site and transferring it either to heat, cool, or to other things like purification of water or delivery of systems. And it's an ongoing process, obviously, to think about, what gets made where and how does it get made and how does it participate in multiple cycles and economies. This pavilion has been 3 different places. It was in Art Basel. It's been to the UNEP. It's now at University of Nairobi. And so there's a lot of ongoing experimentation and even just to think about how these biomaterials decay over time, because a big thing, obviously, if we're going to be switching and transitioning to biocompatible material processes, the issue of life cycle and literally decay is something that we have to think about. Of course, in the Northeast, we have very, very old salt boxes that are 400 years old because of the way they get preserved or sealed with paints and other things. And sometimes the idea of just preserving and keeping in place as a kind of carbon bank, if you will, might be the most important criteria that we might have for a material. But in other cases, it might be that decomposition is part of the process if it can give other benefits, like sorbing, for example. Actually, that the coconut wall before is looking also at sorptive materials, husk and pith and other things that can sorb water, as we said, and be able to maybe regenerate and be able to deliver water or take humidity out of the air or other things. So there's so many, as we said, trade-offs in built environment decisions that don't have to do with one decision or another. I think that complexity of the life cycle is so important, in terms of thinking about how we move materials, where we get them from, how they get transposed, and how we think about them for future generations and for future life cycles. Can we design so that we think about offering, our materials as a bank for future material life cycles as we go on. So that's the last project, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to, if there's time. I'm sorry it took so long. It's it went longer than I anticipated. I apologize. So, yeah, are there any questions or comments? Yeah, sure.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This was electric to listen to. I want to ask a quick question about the maintenance of some of your systems, especially the ones that involve plants. Because of the intrinsic connection to time and to cycles, are there any considered ways that you have incorporated maintenance either through the systems themselves or some sort of secondary maintenance of those smart projects?
This is a critical question, and I'm so glad you asked it because I didn't talk about that in the lecture, and I should have. So we've changed our thinking completely from the beginning. In the beginning, we were all about, let's make this biomechanical hybrid that nobody needs to touch, and literally the one in PSAC 2, it is only maintained once a month. Think about how many times this carpet you're standing on isn't maintained. Probably every night, right? So the issue of maintenance is a value, right? It's a value, it's a socioeconomic value that we have in society. And, or it's a value or a cost. We think about it usually as a cost, a maintenance cost, we even say, right? And we didn't realize that we were thinking about it all wrong from the beginning. But we were still in that complete mechanical electrical paradigm where don't touch the system, don't give them maintenance costs, nobody should be interfacing with this thing. Very early on, every single time, I don't know if you guys saw that there were some shavings on one, but I always use that slide, and I forgot to say that within minutes, people are running to get the shavings to put in the water at their desk. So we have this, we have it all over the building, PSAC 2, that wall. And within literally days of installing that testing device, which it really is, because it's all one seed, one germ, and we're, changing treatments. Like, they were like, when are the tomatoes coming? What about the strawberries? They're like, come on, we want a garden here. We want to eat. It's like right on the other side of the cafeteria. So ASAP, we're still. It's endless, the experiments, of course, and we've been at this 2 decades. We're just getting started. But we're going to switch over to agricultural plants, which are very fast and need a lot of maintenance, right? So, and what we realized is one of the values is the change, and one of the values is people want to touch it. And one of the values is community, like just getting involved. So many people in that building, they have such a stressful job. Per the Fast Company article, if you guys take a look at it, it's a really funny article, but it's, what's that? Oh yeah, thank you. And so we're just changed our idea about maintenance. We're not even sure, we feel like, well, Vinka and I come from farming families, and we're just thinking like, it's really recent that we don't have contact with other living systems, a lot of us urban dwellers, right? We're not sure that the maintenance is an issue. We actually think that participation and more participation in these systems is a huge value, and we've got to think about that, and we've got to design it in, and we've got to work with our clients to design it in, So that was a real eye-opener, that we just had it all wrong, but we still have many things wrong. Anyway. Thank you so much for that, though. That's great. Maintenance is a big issue with living systems, for sure. It's just we have to change our thinking about what it is, whether or not it's a cost or a value. Thank you. Okay. Other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, this is so good.
Hi. Loved your presentation. Learned a lot, Professor Dyson. I was just concerned because not concerned, I would like to learn more from the beginning to end, because you showed a house with the walls, then you showed a slide with Dubai, Kolkata, Saudi Arabia, Manhattan. So I was thinking of the cultural interface. Like, how is this technology accepted? Who's the catchment population? Because if you go to Kenya, South Africa, Africa.
Yeah.
And you're showing UN, which is a very Western institution, right?
Yeah.
So majority of, like I would assume in Kenya, make their own houses.
Yeah.
So when you implement that technology, how it's accepted
Yeah, so
in the
we're
community?
not implementing anything.
As yet.
No, we implement, but we are not. We have partners that are on the ground that are from these cultures. I mean, you saw everyone, all of those students and postdocs and faculty is, for example, in Nairobi, I mean, not just Nairobi and United States. I mean, Kenya and United States are probably the largest countries, but we have people from Uganda, we have people from Rwanda, it's international. In ELM New York, for example, that sort of plywood box, if you will, or CLT, 10 out of 12 of the core team members were not American, were not from the Northeast. So I reject the idea that you can't design for another place, but I also agree with you completely that, that it's very, very important to have complex teams where the teams are coming together to participate in something that means across disciplines, across cultures. You know, we have, for example, in Kenya, we have a lot of our students in the United States are obsessed with Maasai architecture, but a lot of our colleagues in Kenya are not interested in repeating some of that. You know, there's a lot of exchange that I think we have to think more and more now about global patrimony, and I know that's very controversial, but I think that what's so important is there's so much exchange and there's so much to learn. So I'll give you another example. I didn't show today our project in Guatemala, but Guatemala is another place where we do a lot of work, and we will be exhibiting something at COP in Dubai in a year and a half for another large scale ELM. And in that case, we're working with coffee farmers and others, but not just through our partners in Guatemala. We are connected to the farmers in Ethiopia, and they're learning so much about, and there's this kind of complete exchange now between what kinds of products we think that we might be able to utilize from those farms and the complexification and biodiversity of farming methods that are also then going back and forth between Ethiopia and Guatemala. So in my view, I think that you're very right to ask this question because architecture has a history of generification and of, you know, projection and designing for, you know, communities. I think what we need to do, and I apologize if I didn't use this term, but we always need to say designing with. We can't say designing for anymore. That doesn't even work, you know, it's designing with. So this is an amazing point that you're making, and I'm so glad that you gave me the opportunity to say that. Also, I will just say that I know that a lot of our own students are very upset that we're working with the UN. I just want to ask everybody to say, no organization is perfect, and goodness, what would happen if we didn't have COP? What would happen if we didn't have weapons inspections? What would happen if we didn't have refugee camps? I know that UN is not perfect. The federal government here is not perfect, and we work with them too. There are some governments that we will not work with still, but the issue is we have to change from within, and participation is really, really critical. And we understand your point about the UN for sure. It's got a very, very checkered history in many ways, like all organizations. But I think we all have to decide in what way are we working with these organizations? In what way do we partner with federal, municipal, local, international? I do think that for environmental issues, international cooperation is absolutely key. We didn't talk at all about issues of carbon, labeling, material passports, all these things that are absolutely critical. And then also the something that the UN is working really, really hard on is this relationship between fair labor and environmental certifications. So it's hard to do these things with small entities or even with national entities. We do need international entities, as problematic as they are. So we're very, very thankful for that, you know, comment that you've made, but I just want people to think about, we can say, well, we don't need the government. Maybe not, but probably. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we continue the discussion?
Sure, yeah, one last one. There's maybe one last and then we move, yeah, cool. Yeah, okay, cool.
Hi, so these were absolutely stunning and incredibly rigorous projects that you showed today, and I really appreciated the opportunity to see them. I also was really struck by your comment about tearing down the lines between like art, technology, architecture, design. That is something I think is very critical. Could you talk a little bit about how it has been working on like these interdisciplinary teams and projects with diverse, groups from different academic backgrounds? Like, how difficult is it to even bring these teams together? And do you have any recommendations for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. Interdisciplinary work is very difficult and it's very fragile. So I would just say that at the outset. One of the things that I think is amazing about architecture, though, and what we do, is it is inherently interdisciplinary. I always say, like, if people ask what our specialty is, we'll say we're expert integrators, which is true, right? We have to integrate so much different knowledge and from different worlds of knowledge and different the way people see the world, certainly, is going to be very different, and massive diversity amongst stakeholders in any project, no matter how small, usually. So, how easy is it? It's very difficult. We need to stop talking about it, and we need to start funding it. I would say within the academy. I think that that's a big issue is there's a lot of lip service that gets paid to so-called interdisciplinary work, but a lot of times it will only be 4 or 5 disciplines. That's nothing. Think about one architectural project that we have. How many disciplines are we talking about? Or how many stakeholders, how many different worlds of stakeholders. On large projects, district scale, municipal scale, you're talking about thousands of stakeholders, many thousands, so sometimes. So it's really, really a very, very difficult thing to really effectuate change without these extended teams, but they're very fragile. So that's not a good way, that's not a good answer. I do think that if you look, though, at these very large bodies, like NASA, for example, space research is a great example, or the national labs, or other very large industries, they're able to amass and associate a tremendous array on long-term research projects. And so we have the capability as a society. We have to decide that we want to do that for Earth. And what we're doing in Earth is largely the built environment is what is shaping our Earth. If we look at it, I mean, it is, there's numbers like 40% of carbon emissions, but that doesn't even get started with how we're shaping biomes, how we're shaping, ecologies. So I think that we have the capability, and I think those other examples like space research are a really good example that we need to take, and we need to say, yes, let's keep doing it for Mars if you would like, but let's also do it for Earth. That's a cliche, I apologize that we're ending on, but it's really important, I think. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that.